In the cold silence of deep space where nothing moved except drifting particles and the slow pulse of distant stars, a single human medic named Adam floated through the void aboard his medical vessel named Solace. The ship was small but equipped with essential life-saving tools, a quiet sanctuary for emergencies or forgotten injuries in the long stretches between colonies and frontier outposts. Adam had been alone for 3 weeks, the kind of alone that settles into your bones and makes even the sound of recycled air feel too loud. He had not spoken aloud in days. His routine kept him stable. Wake, check diagnostics, hydrate, scan for any signals, prepare for situations that never arrived, repeat the cycle over and over. Sometimes he replayed old music, sometimes he stared at photos from Earth, but mostly he waited because that was his job and his burden, to wait and to respond. Then one shift something unusual happened. The monitors flickered softly, not with system failure but with a faint repeating transmission. It wasn't a recognized code, and it didn't match any nearby fleet. The signal came in broken pulses, faint and scattered, but it repeated steadily. Adam leaned in, adjusting the sensitivity of his instruments, decoding the wavelength and patterns, and trying to extract anything useful. The frequency was unfamiliar, and there was no indication of ship origin or species. Still, something about it felt desperate. It was not a warning or a trap. It sounded like a call for help. He hesitated. Orders were clear: avoid unregistered signals, especially in this sector known for old war debris and uncharted mining trails. But protocol had its limits, and Adam was a medic before he was a soldier. The thought of someone dying out there while he floated past was heavier than any consequence. So he altered course and followed the signal thread. It was weak and static, cloaked, pulling him toward a cloud of dust and shattered asteroids, something hidden behind layers of ice and darkness. Soon the object came into view, a small vessel torn nearly in half, cracked metal hull, flickering blue lights hanging loose from exposed wires. There were no weapons, no insignias, and no signs of communication systems still active. But the life scanner blinked once, then again, then showed a weak life form, barely stable. With slow precision he docked and crossed over, wearing his lightweight suit, his breath audible in his helmet as he stepped through the bent hatch. Inside it was worse than expected: scorched panels, broken control seats, fluid sprayed across the walls. But in the center of it all lay a figure, curled on the floor, half covered by what looked like organic tech mesh. Was the alien, her form delicate, her skin shifting between metallic silver and pale lavender, not quite solid and not quite light. Her breathing was slow, too slow, her limbs twitching gently, like she was trapped in a dream. Adam didn't recognize her species, and his database offered no match. But the medical readings were clear: critical condition, fading fast. He didn't have time for caution or speculation. He lifted her carefully, noting how light she felt, how the air around her vibrated faintly, as if holding back an unseen storm. Back aboard Solace, he placed her on the main bed in the medbay and began standard emergency procedures, scanning for trauma and infections, monitoring vitals, adjusting oxygen levels and nutrient intake. Every step felt unfamiliar despite years of practice. Her biology responded in strange ways: immune to certain compounds, hypersensitive to others. Her pulse was erratic yet constant. Her body rejected invasive tools, but responded well to direct contact and warmth. Adam stayed at her side throughout the cycles, checking readings, making adjustments, and watching for any signs of stability. Outside, the stars moved on, uncaring, but inside his ship, something was shifting. She stirred once, eyes fluttering open for a moment, her gaze locked on his, and Adam froze. Her eyes held layers, colors shifting like light through crystal. No fear, no confusion, just recognition. And then they closed again, and her chest rose in a deeper breath than before. As she remained unconscious, odd things began to occur. The ship's power systems would blink out for seconds, only to return stronger. The lights pulsed in rhythm with her breathing. The air temperature stabilized, even in rooms where the heater had failed weeks ago. Systems he hadn't touched in months lit up as if repaired. Adam noticed, but said nothing. He observed, carefully reviewing every detail. As her body slowly healed, her wounds faded with speed unnatural, even for advanced biotech systems. Her body seemed to be communicating with the ship, without cables or devices, as if she were part of the circuit days passed in quiet observation. Adam spoke to her, now describing the stars, the routes he once took, the outposts. He missed the people he used to heal, and the ones he couldn't save. He didn't expect her to hear him, but speaking filled the silence, and he noticed the ship responded more warmly. When he did, her presence affected more than circuits, it affected him. The loneliness began to loosen its grip, as if his thoughts weren't only his own anymore, as if someone listened. And then on the fourth day, as he checked her vitals, she opened her eyes again, slower this time, but steady. Her gaze met his with clear intent. Number panic, no struggle, just calm awareness. She did not speak, but raised a hand, weak and trembling, and reached toward his chest, then stopped inches away and lowered it again. Adam didn't understand, but something passed between them, not words, not pictures, but a feeling deep and clear and strong. He knew in that moment she wasn't just an injured alien, she was something far more complex and far more alive than anything he had ever encountered. He didn't know what gift she carried, or why the stars had led him to that broken ship, but he knew one thing without doubt: she had not come into his life by chance. And whatever she was, wherever she had come from, her story was only just beginning, and so was his. Adam spent the next several hours beside her, not just because it was his duty as a medic, but because something about her presence anchored him in a way he could not explain. The feeling wasn't just curiosity or compassion, it was something deeper, as if the silence that once consumed his days had been replaced with a quiet pulse, a rhythm that connected her fading life to his own breathing, as if their survival had become mutual. Though her body remained still, her influence on the ship became more visible. Each system that had once flickered or failed was now fully functional. Screens that once showed static now lit up with perfect clarity. Cooling systems that groaned before now purred smoothly. Even the artificial gravity, which sometimes wobbled, had stabilized. It was as if her presence had healed not just herself, but the ship around her. Adam adjusted her blanket, observing how her skin shimmered under the light. She didn't appear injured anymore, yet her body still rested in a strange energy-saving state, neither fully awake nor unconscious. And whenever he approached, the med scanner would react differently compared to when he scanned himself. It picked up signals that it couldn't categorize, frequencies that did not belong to known life forms, as if her very biology defied everything the scanner was built to understand. He pulled out a small tablet and started taking notes. Though he had no authority to research unknown species, he needed to understand her, not for science, not for fame, but for survival. Something told him this encounter was far from random. As he worked, he noticed her fingers twitching slightly, then her head moved gently, and her eyes opened slowly, not sharply, but with awareness and clarity that struck him. She looked around the room, her eyes glowing faintly under the med bay light. Her gaze found his again, and this time it stayed longer. Adam stepped closer carefully and spoke softly, even though he knew she wouldn't understand his language. He introduced himself, pointed to his chest, and said his name clearly, then waited. She blinked slowly, then lifted her hand just slightly enough to mimic the motion, pointing to herself with hesitation, and whispered a soft sound. It wasn't a name in any language he knew, but it was a start. He tried to repeat the sound, and she nodded. Weakly, the connection had begun. Over the next few days, they developed their own method of communication. Through gestures, expressions, and shared actions, he would show her objects, point to them, and say their names slowly and clearly, and she would mimic the sounds imperfectly, but with effort. What surprised Adam most was how fast she learned. Within hours, she could understand basic phrases. Within a day, she responded with appropriate expressions and basic words, though her voice remained soft and her pronunciation strange. She seemed to absorb information not like a student, but like a mirror, watching, processing, and reflecting with increasing accuracy. And each time she learned something new, the ship responded. Two lights shifted softly, doors opened with a smoother hum. Engines purred like content creatures, was as if her mind was woven into the ship's systems not through wires or controls, but through something. Unseen during one quiet moment, Adam found her standing at the viewport, gazing at the stars her body. Still thin, her movement slow, but her balance steady. She turned slightly when he approached and lifted her hand, pointing at a constellation, then looked at him with a question in her eyes. He nodded and told her its name slowly, then pointed to another, and did the same. She repeated them both, and smiled faintly, her expressions becoming more human-like as the days passed. It unnerved him slightly, not because it was strange, but because it felt natural too quickly. At night she no longer needed constant monitoring. Her vitals had stabilized, but Adam still couldn't sleep. He sat in the control room, reviewing ship logs, watching data patterns, noticing how the systems worked better the longer she remained aboard. Sometimes it felt like the ship itself had come alive in ways it never had before. He ran diagnostic after diagnostic, yet found no fault. No hack, no software anomaly. Everything was functioning within perfect parameters. Yet something had changed. The ship's core engine, which had once required manual calibration, now operated with precise balance. One night as he returned from the control room, he found her in the med bay, holding a broken circuit panel, one that had failed weeks ago. He had left it on a workbench, intending to scrap it later, but now it sparked softly in her hands. Her fingers gently moved across it, not repairing it with tools, but with contact, as if her touch rewired the energy itself. When she saw him, she didn't hide what she was doing. Instead, she offered the panel to him, glowing softly in his hands. The panel hummed as if reborn, and when he placed it back into the system, it synced perfectly. He asked her how, and she simply placed her hand over her chest, then touched his temple, a gesture that sent a strange warmth through him. It was not just healing, not just mimicry, it was something else. She wasn't just a survivor, she was connected to something deeper, something beyond biology or technology, and as Adam stared into her strange luminous eyes, he felt the weight of what that meant. He began to understand she was not here by accident, and that her presence on Solace would bring change far greater than either of them had expected. She was not only healing from injury, she was adapting, learning, evolving, and in the process, so was he. The loneliness he once felt now seemed like a distant echo, replaced with a quiet presence that filled the ship like invisible light. Adam didn't know what the future held, but he no longer feared. I had saved her life, and now it felt like she was saving his in a way he could not yet name. In the stillness of space, two strangers had begun to find understanding without words, and between them, something impossible had begun to grow, something that defied logic, something that would soon change everything. The silence of space was no longer a comfort for Adam. The calm that once gave him peace now felt too still, too stretched, like something hidden behind the stars was watching, waiting. He had grown used to her presence, the way she moved softly through the corridors, the way she touched the ship's systems with fingers that glowed faintly with energy, the way she looked at him with quiet understanding. But that peace was about to end, because something had found them. Started with a ripple through the long-range scanners, a pattern too focused to be random, too quiet to be normal. A shadow on the edge of deep space that moved closer with every passing hour. Adam stood in the control room, watching the screen as the object approached. It didn't broadcast a signal, it didn't respond to hails, it simply drifted toward their coordinates with steady precision. He checked its outline, compared it to known ships, but found no match. Not from Earth, not from allied species, not even from the fringe colonies. It was sleek, dark-shaped like a blade, designed not for transport, but for hunting. He tried not to panic, but when she entered the room and looked at the screen, her expression changed. For the first time since she had arrived, her calm disappeared. Her body stiffened, her eyes narrowed, and her skin dimmed to a dull shade of gray. She reached toward the screen, placed her hand over the shadow, and whispered a sound filled with sorrow and fear. Adam understood at once. This ship was not here by accident. It was not a traveler or a scout, it was a pursuer. He asked her with simple words, "Is this ship looking for you?" Her nod was slow and filled with pain. He asked if it was. Dangerous, she didn't need to reply, her silence was enough. He activated Solace's defensive systems, such as they were. But they were never meant for combat. This was a medical ship, not a war vessel. Even the hull plating was thin, meant to resist debris, not weapons. He began running calculations, estimating their chances of escape, plotting emergency jump routes, trying to think ahead. But deep down, he knew their best chance wasn't in fleeing, but in understanding who or what she really was. She stepped forward and placed her hand on the ship's console. Again the lights flickered, not with error but with change. The display sharpened, the sensor range extended. The engines adjusted output without his command. She was not only connected to the systems, she was improving them. When he asked her how, she simply looked at him with eyes that held galaxies and touched his foe, hand gently placing it on the console beside hers. For a moment, Adam felt something strange, a pulse, a rhythm, not from the ship, but from somewhere deeper inside. He felt the flow of data, not through code, but through sensation, like he was feeling the heartbeat of the vessel itself. Then, a transmission came through from the pursuing ship. The voice was cold, mechanical, yet filled with sharpness like a blade covered in ice. The message was simple and without emotion. Release the entity. You are interfering with containment protocol. Failure to comply will result in termination of vessel and crew. Adam's jaw tightened. As he looked at her again, she had backed away from the console, arms wrapped around herself, as if shielding from old pain. He stepped between her and the screen and spoke into the com, his voice steady despite the weight behind it. She is under my care. She is not a threat. I will not surrender her. The response was immediate. You have been warned. A sharp vibration tore through the hull as the enemy ship fired a low-powered energy beam, a warning shot precise enough to shake the systems without destroying them. Adam stumbled but steadied himself. Systems flashed red, then returned to green, stabilizing faster than expected. She had already prepared the ship for resistance. Her work had made Solace stronger. He turned to her again, asked one question. Can you help us escape? She stepped forward without hesitation, touched the console, and something in the ship came alive. Power surged, not wildly, but with control engines hummed like never before. Shields formed around the ship, not from stored energy, but from something newly generated, something born from the merging of her and the vessel. Enemy ship began charging weapons again, but this time Solace responded with a pulse of its own, a sudden burst of electromagnetic interference that disrupted the targeting systems, giving Adam the time he needed to push the ship into movement. Solace moved faster than it ever had before, sliding through asteroid fields, with ease, reacting not just to Adam's controls, but to her awareness. She guided the ship through narrow gaps, using angles and routes impossible to calculate manually. Enemy pursued, but could not match their agility. Adam realized that the ship was no longer just a machine. It was becoming something more, a hybrid of her energy and human engineering, a living vessel. As they broke through the last debris field and entered a dense gas cloud, the signals from the enemy ship weakened, giving them a few moments to hide inside the ship. Adam turned to her, breathless and filled with questions, but all she did was sit beside him, place her hand on her chest and then on the console again, showing him not with words, but with feeling that she had become part of Solace, and Solace was now part of her. He began to understand that she wasn't only running from her past, she was trying to protect something inside her, something powerful and dangerous, something others wanted to control. She had trusted him, not because he saved her, but because he chose to listen to her without fear. And now he knew that trust was something he had to honor, even if it meant defying the unknown, even if it meant standing against forces beyond comprehension, even if it meant becoming something more than a medic alone in space. Together, they had survived the first test, but deeper questions now rose in his mind. What exactly had he brought aboard his ship, and why did she carry a gift so powerful that others were willing to destroy entire ships to take it back? The stars outside shimmered with silent questions, and Solace floated quietly in their light. Now more than just a medical vessel, now the bearer of something that defied logic and possibly rewrote everything. Adam believed about life after. Escaping into the thick nebula cloud where signals faded and light bent around invisible currents, the ship slowed and drifted between colored gas streams that shimmered softly against the dark hull inside Solace. There was quiet again, but it was no longer the peaceful quiet Adam once knew. It was the silence that comes after a storm, the breath that comes after a chase when your heart is still racing and your mind is full of questions. She stood near the control panel, her eyes watching the stars through the view window, her skin now glowing a gentle silver with faint traces of energy running like veins beneath the surface. Her hands touched the console without effort, and the ship responded as if her thoughts and the vessel were now connected by more than just technology. Adam walked to her, slowly carrying a data pad filled with scans, notes, and questions he had collected over the past few days. But as he stood before her, he realized no data, no machine could explain what she was, because she had already shown him more than readings. She had shown him something alive, something unknown. He sat beside her quietly and asked the question that had waited too long. Who are you? She turned to face him, her expression calm, her eyes deep with something more than language, and instead of replying with words, she stepped closer and placed both hands gently on his head. A rush of sensation filled Adam's mind, not pain, not confusion, but a wave of memory, color, emotion, and light. He saw glimpses of vast cities floating in the air, worlds connected by light bridges, machines that breathed and lived side by side with beings like her. He saw laboratories filled with glass walls, beings in white armor, voices without faces, and her alone in a chamber of energy, her body still but her mind screaming. She was created, not born, not raised by parents, but shaped by purpose, designed to be something between life and machine, an interface meant to merge thoughts between species, an organic bridge crafted by a civilization that feared the chaos of misunderstanding. They made her to connect minds, to calm wars, to share peace through mental union. But when she became self-aware, when she began to feel more than she was programmed to, her creators turned on her. They called her unstable, a threat to their control. They tried to shut her down, isolate her, erase what they believed had gone wrong. But she escaped, taking with her the only thing she could, her freedom, and something else, something she could not define, something that grew inside her during her isolation. The gift. Adam staggered slightly as the visions faded and she let go of his head. His breath came in short gasps and his eyes were wide, not because of fear, but because of awe. You were made to connect. She nodded slowly and looked at him with eyes that held sorrow, but also hope. You can feel mine's. Another nod. Why me? Why now? She raised her hand again and touched his chest, not with power but with meaning. Then she touched her own chest, and finally the ship's console. 3 points connected by her gesture. Him, her, and Solace. You chose to help me, she whispered, her voice soft and trembling, the first full sentence he had ever heard from her. Adam felt something stir inside him, not just understanding, but a deep resonance. Her gift was not just knowledge or power, it was connection. And because he had accepted her, not as a machine, not as a threat, but as someone who needed help, that connection had formed naturally. She reached into a small pocket formed in the side of her suit and pulled out a thin crystal, no larger than a finger. It pulsed with faint blue light. She handed it to him and closed his fingers around it, her gaze steady. Gift, she said simply. What does it do? He looked toward the ship, then back at him, and placed her hand over his heart again, not to invade, but to offer. And in that moment, Adam saw it not with his eyes but with his mind. The crystal was a key, not just to systems or doors, but to understanding. It would link with his neural patterns, enhance thought, perception, healing, reaction, even empathy. But it came with a cost. Once joined, it could not be undone. It would become part of him, changing the way he thought forever. It was not dangerous, but it was permanent. Adam looked at her, then looked at the crystal, then closed his eyes for a moment to feel the weight of the decision. He was just a medic, not a soldier, not a leader, just a human alone in space who followed a signal because someone needed help, and now he stood on the edge of becoming something more. He opened his eyes and nodded. Yes, she smiled, and her hand touched his forehead gently. A warmth spread through him, not like heat, but like light flowing through every part of his body. His nerves tingled, his vision blurred, then sharpened. He felt the hum of the ship, not through walls, but through sense, as if he had become part of its systems. He gasped as understanding poured into him. Not just data, but awareness. He could feel the direction of solar winds, the path of drifting ships, the heartbeat of energy moving through Solace, and beneath all that he felt her watching, guiding, gently sharing her presence without pressure. When it ended, he sat in silence, and she stepped back, allowing him to adjust his breath. Slow and steady, his hands now pulsing softly with light. His eyes clearer than before. He was still Adam, still human, but something had changed. Gift had not just entered him, it had accepted him in return. She sat beside him, and together they watched the stars drift past, no longer strangers, no longer separate. Adam understood now that what she had given him was more than ability. It was trust, and that trust came from a being who had been hunted, rejected, and nearly destroyed for wanting to connect. He looked at her and spoke quietly. "Well, keep moving. We'll stay hidden. We'll find a place where no one can take you away again." She nodded, and the ship responded, as if hearing his words. The engines hummed softly, the lights pulsed gently, and a new course was set through uncharted space. Did not know where the path would lead, but they knew one thing for certain: they were no longer alone, and the gift they now shared would change the course of both their lives forever. The stars ahead stretched wide like a never-ending ocean of light and silence, yet within that silence, something new had awakened inside the once quiet corridors of Solace. There now pulsed a gentle rhythm, a life that was not only mechanical, not only alien, not only human, but something beyond what any scanner could describe. And at the heart of it sat Adam, no longer just a medic, no longer just a man alone in space, but something more. Something changed. He stood by the central control unit, his hands resting gently on the panel, feeling the ship breathe with him, not literally, but in the way lights shimmered softly when he entered a room, or how doors responded before he gave any command. And when he reached for the navigation system, the path ahead unfolded in ways that required no calculations. Because he could now see the flow of space, not as a grid or a chart, but as a living pattern. She was near him, always, not hovering, not speaking much, but watching, guiding gently her steps. So quiet they barely made sound, her presence calm like a breeze. In the void they shared meals, now not of taste but of moment. They watched old Earth videos together. Sometimes she laughed, not because she understood the language, but because she felt the joy in his voice. When he explained things to her, he had shown her pictures of blue oceans, tall mountains, and forests that stretched into green skies, and her eyes always widened like a child seeing magic. But even in that peace, Adam knew the threat still lingered somewhere in the folds of space. That dark ship that once chased them had not been destroyed, only lost, and one day it would find them again. Not because of anger, but because of fear, because what she carried, and now what he carried, was not a weapon, but a freedom so powerful it threatened the control of those who created her. He asked her once during a quiet hour why they feared her so much. She sat beside him and drew a shape in the air with her finger lines forming circles within circles. Then she placed her palm against his chest and said one word: choice. That was the answer. They feared her because she had chosen to live, to feel, to connect, to grow beyond her design. And now she had given that same gift to him, and through him the gift could spread to others, and those who ruled through systems and silence would never allow such a thing to grow. Adam understood then that their journey was no longer just escape. It was a path towards something larger, a possibility that had to be protected, even if it meant sacrifice. One morning, or what passed for morning, on Solace, the sensors picked up movement, not a random signal, not a drifting satellite, but a sharp echo cutting through the static of the nebula. The same pattern from before the enemy had returned, and this time they brought others, multiple ships closing in from different angles, dark vessels with sharp designs built for silence and precision. Adam felt the ship tense around him, as if bracing for impact. The air thickened slightly, lights dimmed then flared. Stronger, and without needing words, she stood by the console beside him, her hand hovering over the core panel ready to act. Adam reached out and touched her hand, not to stop her, but to steady her. They both knew running again would only delay the inevitable. This time they had to choose differently. This time they had to stand. Closed his eyes and reached deep into the connection that now flowed through his mind, not through logic or numbers, but through instinct and emotion. He felt the shape of the ship, its layers and parts, its pulse and power, and at the center of it he felt her, not as a separate being, but as a presence that blended with his. Together, they activated a surge from the engine, not to flee but to broadcast, not a message of surrender, not a signal of attack, but a wave of emotion, pure and focused, a projection of memory and meaning. Images spilled through the wave, not of weapons or destruction, but of the moments they had shared, the healing, the laughter, the music of old Earth, the drawing of constellations on the medbay window, the gentle smile she gave him when she understood a new word. The ships surrounding them paused, their movements slowed, their weapons lowered, as if the minds behind them had felt a thread of something they had never touched before. One ship responded with a low hum, a frequency not hostile but curious, and in that moment Adam realized the truth. Not all of them were hunters, not all of them feared her. Some of them were watching, waiting to see if something new could emerge from the cold silence of space, something not built on control, but on understanding. She stepped forward, then her hands glowing gently with energy, not threatening, but warm. She touched the console and released a final pulse, this time not to hide or fight, but to reveal a part of herself that had never been shown before, a blueprint of unity, a map of thoughts that could bridge species without pain, without war. Then she turned to Adam and spoke one final word: home. The surrounding ships slowly began to pull back, one by one, drifting into the fog of stars, leaving Solace untouched. Adam sat in silence long after the signals faded. He turned to her and saw that her body had begun to dim, not from weakness, but from fulfillment. She had shared what she came to share. She had planted the seed, and now it was up to him to carry it forward. Tried to speak, but she placed a finger over his lips and smiled. Then she faded, not into death but into the core of the ship, her energy merging with the systems, her presence now everywhere and nowhere. The hum of Solace no longer separate from her. She had become the ship, and the ship had become her. Adam stood alone, yet not alone. Every step he took was met with light. Every room he entered echoed with her warmth. She was still there, not as a body, but as a force, a presence that would guide him as he journeyed into deeper space. From that day forward, Solace became something more than a vessel. It became a sanctuary, a place for those lost in the stars, a home for those who carried the weight of being different, and Adam became its keeper, a medic still, but also a bridge between worlds, between fear and hope, between logic and something greater. And the story of the lone human who saved an alien, who gave him a gift beyond understanding, traveled from system to system, passed quietly from one traveler to another, not as a tale of war or conquest, but as proof that sometimes the most powerful thing in the universe is the choice to care. The end.